Welcome everyone to another video on this channel. Today I'm gonna be sharing 3 tips on how you can exploit low stakes and mid stakes population in order to boost your win rate. Without further ado, let's jump right into the content. The first tip is raise more from the small blind.
Loosey-goosey, having a sandwich, being on your phone. Woohoo, baby, I love it.
And of course I have also prepared a spot here. Very common situation that we are first in, and I think a lot of guys naturally started limping a lot of hands from the small blind. Why do I think it's more appropriate to raise more from the small blind? In order to give you a better idea of what we should be do from the small blind, let's orientate on what we should do according to theory. If I use my Turtle Masterclass ranges for the spot for around 40 to 50 big blinds, and of course in order to determine what we're supposed to do from the small blind, we need to have a look in the big blind's response. Because if the big blind deviates from GTO, we want to exploit him. And as you can see, the big blind is supposed to be checking behind around 59% of the time. And you will see that very often when you when you work with GTO ranges, that you want to be ISO raising around 40 to 45% on the of the time, depending on the stack size. And if we look at the hands he's supposed to be raising with, you see 50% of the time Queen 9 off, Queen 8 off. These ranges are a little bit more simplified. They follow GTO principles, and they of course then also adjusted to population tendencies. If you are owner of the Channel Masterclass, you will see certain strategies against certain opponents from the small blind. So it's not just copy pasting GTO ranges into the range viewer. You will get GTO yet very exploitative strategies. And as we can see, he's supposed to be raising very frequently with a lot of garbage hands that most people are afraid of.
Garbage day! Huh? No!
And then of course also the value hands, and also the range viewer then gives you an indication of how you should proceed if you face a 4-bet. When you face a 3-bet, which hands to call, which hands to go in with, which hands to 4-bet bluff or 4-bet for value, and so on and so forth. But this is not part of the video. So now think about the stakes you are playing. I of course constantly do research, and when I look at the stats on a low stakes environment, I don't see people raising big blind versus small blind limp around 40 or 45% of the time. In fact, it's more than like 35-30%, and I've seen players that have a 25% raised big blind versus small blind limp, which is a catastrophe. If we look into 3-bet folds, it has to be a lot of suited connectors. It has to be, of course, also a lot of the suited broadways. This is now for 50 big blinds. Most players would naturally just flat play it safe, and they actually only use 3-bet 5-6% of the time, especially on low stakes. They try to stay in their comfort zone. So every single time someone is raising less, you're more incentivized to raise your medium strong hand, because you're going to face 3-bets less often, and you're going to over realize your equity. This is key, and then you take it from there. But I promise you, if you're going to be raising more from the small blind instead of following this limping disease that everyone is trying to teach you and to put into your head, and which actually doesn't really make sense in a lot of player pools, then your win rate from the small blind will increase heavily. I have to be a little more careful in a high stakes environment. People share reads, or they might take more notes, and they might figure out earlier what I'm up to. But you in a low stakes environment or mid stakes environment in huge player pools, don't be afraid of it. Play very exploitative from the small blind. Raise your good hands, every Broadway, every ace, any pocket pair, the strong suited connectors, and limp everything else. Works really well against most opponents, and especially in a live setting where people don't really have the understanding of GTO at all, and they're way too passive in these spots. My next tip: don't bluff when your opponent has a rather strong absolute hand strength. So when you get to the river, and on average your opponent is going to have a lot of 2 pairs, a lot of trips, a lot of flushes, a lot of boats and straights, don't bluff. I prepared an example where we have the typical board, something like 6-6-7 in diamonds, and we c-bet and we face a raise. In this instance, he didn't raise, and we have hands like ace king with one diamond or ace queen with one diamond, and of course we have to call once. And on a certain run out, we of course, according to GTO, we're supposed to bluff some hands. But I want to encourage you to think about a little bit what you would be doing in those kind of spots. If you're the out of position player, you raise the flop, the board kind of develops ugly for a lot of your stronger hands from the flop, and you still somehow attach to your trips.
I had trips.
And I'm going to teach you how you can take advantage of this emotional attachment to your hand strength, or to your opponent's, or your opponent's emotional attachment to his hand strength, and yeah, how you can exploit that. So let's have a look into some pyro stuff, and we're gonna start with the c-betting range. We raise this range from under the gun, take a screenshot if needed. Our opponent is calling something like this, sometimes 3-betting suited connectors, maybe some suited aces, suited kings, but it's not going to make such a big difference. As we can see, we don't want to be c-betting everything. We don't have a lot of 6x. We actually want to do a bunch of checking on this board. And also we don't really want to bet big at all, because our opponent has a lot of very, very strong hands here, a lot of 6x. And our opponent is supposed to be raising close to 30%. He can just go completely bananas. He has an equity disadvantage. That means he has a lot of very trashy hands. But as you can see, his nutted hands are way more than ours. You can see the green ones, basically just the overpairs, and they barely reach 80%, whereas the out of position player has a bunch of 80 plus and even close to 90% equity, and a lot of 60% plus equity hands. So in terms of nuttedness, out of position has a clear advantage. That's why we want to be so careful. And by using just a small sizing, we attack these auto folds here, the jack 3 in hearts, or king deuce off, these kind of hands we're just trying to fold out. So now let's assume we c-bet and we face a raise. We c-bet 2 big blinds into a pot of 7 big blinds, and he raises to 7 big blinds. As you can see, ace queen here with backdoor flush draw, ace king, ace jack off with backdoor flush. We're still ahead against some hands. He might be protection raise with 7s or 5s. He might be raising an 8. He might be raising a draw. So with our 2 overcards, we're still good enough to make the call with close to more than 40% equity. So we call, and let's assume the turn is the 10 in diamonds. So we bet small, and the river is the jack in hearts. So our opponent checks again. That check raised on the flop. Don't forget, he check raised the flop, then checks the turn, check calls the turn. And now, because he might have a weak 6 that he's afraid of the flush, makes a lot of sense to also check sometimes here. Now you get in the situation that you have ace king, ace queen, king queen with 1 diamond. And of course, because you're a GTO wizard, you want to be balanced. You want to be one of the fancy high stakes racks that also is balanced in every single spot, right? No, not really. That's bullshit, because we basically rely on our opponent having the ability to recognize the average hand strength he's going to have in this spot and being able to lay down trips. As we can see now, we want to be shoving, according to theory, ace queen, queen in diamonds. We want to be shoving king queen with king in diamonds. And we can even compare the EVs of how profitable shoving compared to checking. And as you can see, yes, ace queen with the ace in diamonds would be quite profitable. Shoving ace queen with the queen in diamonds is essentially break even, but only under the premise that our opponent, as you can see, is folding 100% of the time king 6, queen 6, even sometimes folding ace 6. He's only calling jack 6 and 10 6. He's even sometimes folding a straight with 9-7 suited with a very low frequency. And again here, even king 6, queen 6 are folding as well. So now question to you. Do you want to be bluffing in a situation where your opponent is essentially supposed to be folding all trips? You want to risk your tournament life where you make, as we've seen, I think 2 big blinds or 2 chips on average, assuming our opponent has to fold trips all the time? No. So in these big pots, when opponents have trips and better, and he has to be aware of the fact that the trips are bottom of his range and he's supposed to fold a lot of them, it's simply a bad spot to bluff. So stay away from it. And don't be afraid, but Ben, I'm going to be unbalanced here. That's great. That's where you make the money. And if you compare the EVs of, let's say, shoving your ace, jack, and diamonds, you see you generate 40 chips. If you bluff with ace, queen off, even though if you have the ace and diamonds, you make 2.5 chips. So you have to understand your win rate in poker does not come from making super fancy bluffs or super fancy balanced GTO bluffs. That's absolute bullshit. Yes, we need PyroSolver, we need the strategy to see what makes sense and then make the exploits in whatever population pool or whatever pool we are playing. So please keep that in mind. Don't try to be fancy. When you kind of have the feeling, wow, opponent's range is pretty strong here, stay away from bluffing, will save you a lot of money. Let's move on to my last tip, which is c-bet every board that is very favorable for your range, but also apply big sizings. A very common situation where we open raise from a middle position or early position, and the board comes very favorable for our range, ace, queen, 9. And we're going to look into a couple of post-flop simulations with PyroSolver. So we can take ace, queen, 9, we can take ace, jack, 10. As you can see here, we see that our entire range. If we take the board ace, ace, 10, if we take the board queen, jack, 9, if we take the board I'm going to show you next. If we look at ace, 10, 9, even not necessarily only Broadway, but mainly yeah, very connected. So even our king, queens, king, jacks have a lot of equity. We have a lot of strong ace-x or something like king, jack, 10. I see a lot of people being afraid of, yeah, but it also connects with big blind's range. It's got a lot of 2 pairs and pair plus straight draw. Don't be afraid.
It looks too scary.
You're going to have way more better hands. So here we go. As you can see, also we bet our entire range, even though it's not a Broadway board, because also here our queen 10s, jack 10s, our middling part has connected much better with this board. An exceptional board where we might be checking back more frequently would be ace 4-5 or ace 3-5 or ace 3-4, ace 3 deuce, where we're not going to have the nut straights. We're not going to be opening ace deuce, ace 3 off, but our opponent is defending those hands. Also, we open any pocket pair, but especially when we open raise from the earliest position, we're not going to be opening deuces and threes. So also use big sizings with your value hands. So let's take the board queen, jack, 9, and what happens if we bet 1/3 pot? You see that our opponent is supposed to be raising quite thin for value, something like king, queen, quite frequently, even a lot of straight draws. Then some very unnatural suited king x hands, of course the 2 pairs, but in reality people are not going to be raising so aggressively. So you want to be going ahead and c-bet your strong value hands bigs, your ace queens, king queens, 2 pairs, straights and sets, because people are not going to do the job for you to be raising a lot. Or let's take ace 9, 8. If we bet 1/3, you see 15% raising. Would you raise ace 10 on this board? Would you raise ace jack on this board? Would you be raising ace 7? Would you be raising all your straight draws? Probably not to that frequency. We of course also want to just sometimes call. So this is very often how micro or low stakes, even mid stakes players approach these spots, where they're way too passive. They just want to call, especially against a small sizing. But you want to go ahead and raise. You make him fold a lot of better hands, broadways, and you don't need to have a lot of fold equity. Once you raise with a pair, if let's say you bluff raise your 8-7 suited, this is a thing. No, it's not really. Are we going to be raising any pair? Like 8-6 wants to raise, so sometimes we want to be raising those bottom pairs that need protection against king, queen, king, jacks, king, 10s. Still have 5 outs.
We have you 4-1. I like those odds.
So even against the ace kings and ace queens, and we block 8s and ace 8, yes, it will happen that you will run into a set or 2 pair. But this is part of poker. You can't avoid the inevitable. That means that sometimes you will have a hand that is forced or supposed to be raising, but your opponent simply has a stronger hand. That's part of the game. And if we look into the EV of, let's say, raising with 8-6 off, you see it's fairly marginal. You make on average 1 chip. If we raise jack 10 suited, we make on average 4 chips in a pot of 9 chips. Ace jack makes around 9 chips. So even those hands are clear value raises. And so bottom line, if people are not going to be raising so thin for value, it's your responsibility to go ahead, bet big for value, and also even though this might be a board where you have a lot of hands like king, queen, king, jack, you don't really know what to do with them. As you can see, you want to go ahead and bet. It's always a profitable bet, even though our big blind, or in this case the villain, is supposed to play very aggressively from the big blind. So now imagine you play against in a population pool. Why the fuck am I always saying population pool? In a pool where players are very likely going to be raising 10% on average in this spot, or 9 or 8%. And this happens a lot. If you work a lot with stats, you will see players having very low check raise frequencies. And then you can just go ahead and bet everything. Play very exploitative. Bet your bluffs or your protection bets 1/3. If you have a good hand, you go ahead and bet 2/3. Very simple, straightforward poker. No bullshit, no fancy GTO stuff. But this will serve you for understanding poker better. It's very important, of course, to understand GTO, but not necessarily apply GTO. I hope these 3 tips will help you improving your game, improving your win rate. And let me know, what are the exploits that you're making in low stakes. And yeah, curious to read those exploits that you're making. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. See you at the tables, and good luck.